What would you do if the man you crossed 1,000 miles to marry was already dead? For Elena Morrison, that was no tragic headline in the paper. It was the moment her future vanished in a cloud of dust outside a lonely Colorado ranch. A woman who had traded her pride for survival suddenly found herself unwanted, stranded and staring into the eyes of a man who wanted nothing to do with her. But sometimes, fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we need, wrapped in everything we fear. The train screeched into Denver with its usual chorus of steam and iron, but Eleanor Morrison stepped off with a heart pounding louder than the locomotive. Her satin bonnet and travel-stained gloves marked her as neither society's darling nor a pioneer. She was something in between. A mail-order bride. She clutched the letter that had carried her across states, across shame, across the ruins of her father's bank scandal. Thomas Garrett had promised stability, a future, even a kind of affection. She told herself love could grow later. Right now, survival mattered most. But when the wagon delivered her at the Garrett Ranch, the door opened not to her groom, but to his younger brother, James. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar tracing his jaw like a map of hard living. His eyes carried suspicion sharper than a blade. Elena Morrison. His voice was rough, as though unused to courtesy. "Yes," she answered, smoothing her skirt. "I'm here to marry Thomas Garrett." James's silence was heavier than words. Finally, he said, "Thomas is gone. Fever took him last week." The world tilted. Her knees weakened. She clutched the porch post like a lifeline. All the plans she had stitched together unraveled in one sentence. I don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't expect you to," James said, his tone almost bitter. "But there's nothing left to explain. You came too late. The ranch should have been her new beginning. Instead, it became a cage. Returning east meant facing scandal, ruin, whispers about her family's disgrace. Staying meant surviving under the roof of a man who clearly wanted her gone. Yet James couldn't abandon her. Even a man hardened by scars couldn't turn a woman into the dirt. "You'll have a roof," he said, "till you find where else to go." But I'm no husband. The next weeks were a comedy of disasters that might have been funny, if they hadn't been so humiliating. Elena tried cooking stew and nearly burned the cabin down. She attempted laundry and turned every shirt into something fit for rags. Once, she mixed her herbal remedies into James's coffee, nearly sending him doubled over in pain. James cursed under his breath more times than he could count, yet something in her determination kept him from throwing her out. One night, after scraping blackened bread from a skillet, he asked, "You ever done a day's housework in your life?" She froze, then admitted the truth. "No, my father was a banker. We had maids, cooks, until we didn't. When his bank collapsed, so did everything else." Her voice cracked. I thought I could learn. Pretend to be what Thomas wanted, but I've only made a fool of myself." For the first time, James didn't scold her. He only looked at her, really looked, seeing past the silk gloves and ruined stews. "So you came here running from disgrace?" Her chin lifted. "And you? You act like kindness is a crime." He didn't answer, but later, alone in the barn, James remembered the sound of his father's voice, harsh, cruel, breaking his mother's spirit night after night. He had vowed never to marry, never to trap another woman in that cycle. Distance was safer. Silence. Safer still. Still, life on the frontier left no room for pride. When a storm threatened the cattle, One evening, as the sun melted over the horizon, Elena sat on the porch, bandaging a blister from chopping wood. James handed her a canteen without a word. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but bright. "You know," she said softly, "failure has been my truest companion here." "You're still standing," James replied. "So are you," she countered. For a moment, neither moved. The air buzzed with unspoken truths. Then James turned away, hiding in chores that didn't need doing. He couldn't let himself want her. Wanting led to ruin. But Eleanor's presence had already begun to undo him, and whether he admitted it or not, his quiet, haunted heart was already listening. Some say love is born in candlelit halls, with music and fine clothes. But for Elena and James, it was born in smoke-filled kitchens, muddy fields, and endless arguments about how to chop firewood. Theirs was no fairy tale, just a slow, stumbling journey where every disaster brought them closer than either dared to admit. Life on the Garrett Ranch settled into a rhythm, though hardly a smooth one. At dawn, James would head out to tend the cattle, and Elena, determined to prove she wasn't useless, would tackle the chores he assigned. Some days she made progress, other days disaster. Like the morning she attempted biscuits, James returned to find the cabin filled with smoke, the pan fused to the oven, and Eleanor waving a towel furiously. "I followed the recipe," she protested through coughing. "Recipe?" James squinted at the charred lumps. "Where'd you even get one?" "I wrote it down from memory." "Or I thought I remembered it." He shook his head, fighting a laugh he didn't want to give her. "Those aren't biscuits. Those are bricks. Maybe we can build a chimney with them." Her face burned with humiliation, until James, usually so serious, actually laughed. A real, unguarded laugh. She threw a biscuit brick at him and he ducked, grinning. For once, their failures felt less like battles and more like beginnings. As weeks turned to months, Elena discovered she could not master housewifely arts overnight. But she had other talents. When a travelling merchant came by with ledgers full of debts and supplies, James muttered about numbers. Elena, daughter of a banker, scanned the accounts in minutes. "You're being overcharged," she said flatly. $2 more on the grain than last season's rates. "And he's hiding it in the columns." The merchant blustered, but she exposed every trick. By the time he left, red-faced, James stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You just saved me a month's wages," he said. She smiled faintly. "So, I'm not entirely useless." "Not useless at all," he admitted. That night, James found himself unable to sleep, thinking of her clever eyes, the way she caught things he missed. Maybe she wasn't the bride his brother had chosen, but she was no fraud either. The land itself tested them both. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept in across the plains. James shouted for Eleanor to get inside, but she followed him anyway, skirts whipping in the wind. Together they struggled to drive the cattle to higher ground. Rain plastered her hair against her face. Mud caked her shoes. Yet she never faltered. When they finally collapsed under the barn roof, soaked and trembling, James looked at her with something dangerously close to admiration. "Why didn't you listen?" he demanded, though his voice lacked anger. "Because I couldn't leave you out there alone," she answered simply. The words struck him deeper than he expected. He'd spent years alone by choice. But now, her loyalty frightened him almost as much as it comforted him. Nights were the hardest. The cabin walls felt smaller with every passing week. James worked late to avoid the intimacy of silence, but Eleanor's presence seeped in regardless. She hummed while mending clothes, scribbled notes in a journal, sometimes whispered prayers when she thought he was asleep. One evening he found her sitting on the porch, staring at the mountains. "What do you miss most?" he asked without meaning to. She startled, then said softly, the sound of music. My mother played piano. Even when father was shouting, there was always music somewhere in the house. It made me feel safe. James swallowed hard. My house never had music, only shouting. For the first time, he told her about his parents, about nights he hid in the barn while his father raged, about vowing never to marry, never to risk becoming that kind of man. His voice cracked once, but Elena didn't interrupt. She only listened. When he finished, she whispered, "You're not your father, James. You never could be." The words were dangerous. They lit a spark he had spent years smothering. As autumn painted the land gold, the awkward companionship between them deepened into something else. He found himself watching her laugh with the neighbours' children, or studying by lamplight, her brow furrowed in concentration. She caught herself memorising the way his shoulders moved when he worked, the rare smile that transformed his whole face. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. The turning point came one crisp October evening. Elena, determined to prove her progress, insisted on preparing supper alone. James expected another disaster, but when he sat at the table, the stew was rich, the bread only slightly singed. "It's edible," he admitted. Her eyes danced. "That's the highest praise I'll ever get, isn't it?" He met her gaze, warmth softening his usually guarded expression. "It's better than I ever expected." Silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. She lowered her eyes, but not before he saw the flush on her cheeks. That night, Elena wrote in her journal by candlelight, "I came here a fraud, pretending to be something I wasn't. Yet he sees me as more than my failures. And I see him, not as a shadow of his father, but as a man who carries scars, yet still works, still protects, still tries." Meanwhile, James lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She deserves someone who can promise her more than silence and fear. But God help me, I don't want her to leave. Every love story faces its test. For James and Elena, it did not come with fire or famine, but with a knock at the door. A woman carrying not only Thomas Garrett's child, but the power to tear apart everything Elena and James had built. The knock came on a cold November morning. James opened the door, expecting a neighbour or a ranch hand. Instead, a woman stood there, her coat stretched tight across her swollen belly, eyes burning with shame and defiance. "My name is Sarah Collins," she said, "and I'm carrying Thomas's child." The words landed like a stone between them. Elena, standing behind James, froze. She didn't need Sarah to explain further. Her meaning was clear. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched the doorframe. "He promised me marriage. Before he wrote to you." Her eyes flicked toward Eleanor with accusation. "I was supposed to be his wife." "Not you." James stepped outside, closing the door gently behind him, though he could still feel Eleanor's stare through the wood. "You should come in out of the cold," he said gruffly. "No, not until you understand. The town knows. They whisper every time I pass. Soon this baby will be here, and I'll have no name to give him. Unless—" her voice cracked, "unless you marry me." James felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had never wanted marriage. Not with Eleanor, not with Sarah, not with anyone. But the weight of his brother's mistakes pressed down like chains. Inside the cabin, Elena sat at the table, hands folded tight. She heard their voices through the thin walls. She didn't catch every word, but she didn't need to. Sarah's presence was proof enough. When James finally returned, his face was grim. "She's telling the truth. Thomas promised her marriage before you, Elena's throat burned. So I was nothing more than a replacement bride." "No," James said quickly. It's not like that. Isn't it? I gave up everything to come here. And now what? I'm supposed to step aside for another woman's claim? His silence spoke louder than words. The following days were a blur of tension. Sarah remained in town, but her shadow stretched across the ranch. Neighbors whispered. At the general store, women avoided Elena's gaze. She was the outsider, the usurper of promises not meant for her. James wrestled with duty and desire until his head ached. At night, he paced the porch, staring at the mountains, searching for an answer. Elena watched him from the window. Each hour he didn't speak was another wound. If he loved me, truly loved me, wouldn't the choice be clear? One evening, unable to bear it, Elena confronted him. James, tell me the truth. If Sarah hadn't come, would you have wanted me? Or have I just been convenient? The question sliced through him. He wanted to say yes, that she was wanted, desired, loved. But fear wrapped his throat. Fear of repeating his father's cycle. Fear of trapping her in his brokenness. So he hesitated, just for a moment. But that moment was enough. Elena's eyes filled with tears. That's all I needed to know. She turned away, her back straight, though her heart was breaking. In town, pressure mounted. The pastor hinted at the moral duty owed to the unborn child. The storekeeper muttered about a man's responsibility. James felt the weight of every stare, every judgment. Sarah, desperate and exhausted, cornered him one afternoon outside the blacksmith's. I'm not asking for love, James. Only a name for my child. Your brother would have married me. James clenched his fists. Don't use my brother to bind me. I'm not, she said softly. I'm asking you to be the man everyone already believes you are. Her words echoed long after she left. Back at the ranch, Elena packed her small trunk in silence. She couldn't bear to wait for James to decide between her and another woman. She had thought she'd built a life here, earned respect, even love. But now she felt like an intruder again, someone waiting for a place that would never truly be hers. James found her folding her few dresses. What are you doing? Preparing, she said calmly. Once I earn enough with the little I can do here, I'll leave. You won't have to choose, James. You can do your duty without me complicating things. He grabbed her wrist, desperation in his voice. It's not that simple. No, James, it's exactly that simple. If you loved me without hesitation, you'd have said so. Instead, you're standing here torn between me and your brother's memory. That tells me everything. She pulled free, leaving him speechless. That night, James sat in the barn, staring at the stars through the broken roof. His father's voice haunted him. A woman is a burden. Better to keep her quiet than keep her happy. But Elena's words cut deeper than those memories. If you loved me without hesitation, you'd have said so. And the truth was, he did love her, fiercely, painfully. But fear chained his tongue. The reckoning came at Sunday service. Sarah, her belly prominent, sat alone in the pews while whispers filled the chapel. James felt every eye on him. The preacher's sermon seemed aimed directly at his chest. True love is not silence. It is sacrifice. It is standing firm when others would waver. When the service ended, Sarah's weary eyes met his. Elena stood a few rows behind, her face pale but proud. James realized he could lose one, or both. But indecision was no longer an option. Winter settled over Colorado, burying the ranch in silence and snow. But inside the cabin, silence meant something else entirely. Elena went about her chores with practiced calm, polite, efficient, distant. She still cooked, still mended, still fed the animals, but the laughter that had once filled the walls was gone. Her words to James were clipped, her eyes averted. "You needn't keep doing all this," James muttered one morning as she stirred the fire. "I know," she replied, not looking at him, "but it passes the time until I can leave." Her voice was calm, but the message clear. She was no longer waiting for him. In town, Sarah's situation reached its breaking point. Rumours spread faster than firewood burned. Women crossed the street rather than greet her. One afternoon she collapsed outside the mercantile, her strength gone. It was the town's widowed doctor, Henry Whitfield, who knelt beside her. A kind man with 2 young children, he carried her inside, gave her water, listened without judgment. And later, when gossipers sneered, he said clearly, "No woman deserves shame for a promise broken to her. If she'll have me, I'll give her my name." The town gasped. Sarah wept, and for the first time in months, hope lit her eyes. When the news reached the ranch, James felt a wave of relief, but it was hollow. "She's found her solution," he told Elena quietly. "The doctor has asked her to marry him." Elena paused in her sewing, then nodded once. "I'm glad for her." Her needle never stopped moving. "That means," he began, but the words faltered. "That means I'm free. That means I can choose you without shame." But Eleanor did not give him the chance. "James, don't mistake this for a second chance between us. You hesitated when I needed certainty. I need a man who will fight for me without question, not one who weighs me against his fears." Her eyes lifted to his, steady and unflinching. "I won't settle for being the easier choice." James had faced blizzards, wild cattle, broken bones, but nothing struck him harder than those words. That night, days passed. Elena remained, but only in body. She began selling small needlework pieces to neighbours, saving coin quietly. James noticed the growing pouch of money she hid in her trunk. Every coin meant she was closer to leaving. He tried to speak once, but the words caught. Another time he reached for her hand as they passed in the kitchen, but she pulled away as if burned. The distance was unbearable, and yet he had no one to blame but himself. One evening a snowstorm howled against the cabin. Elena sat by the fire, reading by lamplight. James, pacing restlessly, finally blurted, "Why do you stay if you've already decided to leave?" She closed the book slowly. "Because I have nowhere else to go." "Not yet, but don't mistake necessity for forgiveness." Her words landed like stones. He wanted to shout, to beg, to swear he would never fail her again, but he saw in her eyes that cheap promises would mean nothing. She needed proof. The proof came unexpectedly. A week later, James was in town when he overheard 2 men outside the saloon. "That Garrett girl? She'll be gone come spring. No man wants a banker's daughter with scandal on her name." "Better for him. He'll be free of her. Don't know why he kept her this long." James's blood boiled. For years he had avoided conflict, unwilling to be the man who raised his voice or his fists. But this time, he stepped forward, jaw tight. "You'll keep her name out of your mouths," he growled. The men sneered. "And if we don't?" James's fist connected before words could answer. The brawl spilled into the snow, leaving him bloodied but unbroken. When it was over, he stood tall, chest heaving. "She is worth 10 of you, and I'll fight anyone who says otherwise," the words carried through the crowd. For the first time, James declared aloud what he had kept locked inside. Elena was his, not by obligation, but by choice. When Elena heard of the fight, she was furious. You let them bait you into fists like a hot-headed boy, she scolded, tending the cut above his brow. They insulted you, he muttered. I don't need a man to fight my battles, she said, voice sharp. Then, more quietly, I need a man who'll stand beside me. Not just when others speak ill, but when doubt creeps into his own heart. Her words cut deeper than the bruises, but James knew this truth. Fists wouldn't win her back. Only constancy would. That night, as she slept, James sat awake by the fire, finally facing his demons. His father had lived in fear of losing control, so he controlled everything. James, in fear of becoming him, had controlled nothing, least of all his own heart. But Eleanor deserved a man who chose her with courage, not caution. And if he wanted her trust again, he would have to prove it, not once, but every day. Spring crept over Colorado, but the thaw did not touch the cabin. Elena moved like a careful guest. James circled her. James chose a day and rode into town. He stopped first at the cottage behind the clinic, hat in hand. Sarah answered, her belly proud, Doctor. Henry Whitfield steady in the doorway. I came to ask forgiveness, James said. Not for Thomas, God rest him, but for my silence. I let fear make a coward of me. If you'll allow it, I'll set aside 6 calves from this spring's branding for your child. Not as penance, but because my brother should have stood here. Sarah's eyes softened. Henry clasped James's shoulder. Your offer is generous, the doctor said. But more than money, she needs dignity. The town still whispers, then let me face them, James answered. Tonight, at the Grange. By evening, the meeting hall was crowded, ranchers warming hands around coffee, women with folded arms, boys pretending not to stare at Sarah's belly. The pastor waited near the stove. Elena arrived late and stayed by the door. James didn't clear his throat or tug his hat. I loved my brother, he began, and he made promises he didn't keep. Folks laid those promises at my feet. I let their weight decide my silence. He turned to Sarah. I will stand godfather to your child if you wish it. The calves will be held in the doctor's name till the boy or girl is of age. If any man speaks crooked about Sarah Collins or her child, he can say it to me. A murmur moved through the room. James faced the back where Eleanor stood. His voice gentled. And to Eleanor Morrison, I made you feel like something to be weighed, not chosen. You asked for a man who wouldn't hesitate. I can't erase the moment I failed you. I can change every moment after he lifted a folded paper. This is a deed transferring half the ranch to Elena now, before any vows. Not as bait. As truth, I won't hold power over you to keep you. If you walk away tomorrow, you walk away equal Elena's heart pounded. Gifts were easy. Paper had weight. Paper survived storms. James set a cracked leather belt on the stove's edge, the harsh thing his father had used like punctuation. I kept this as a warning. All it did was keep me afraid. He tossed it into the fire and watched it blacken. I'm done letting a dead man teach me how to live. He looked at the town. I'll not be the quiet man anymore, not when quiet harms. If you ever hear me choose silence when I should speak, come to my door and remind me of tonight. Sarah stepped forward first. I accept the godfather and the calves, and I ask the town to lay down its stones. Henry nodded, arm around her. The pastor said, confession and restitution. That's a start. Elena slipped outside into the blue evening. Footsteps crunched behind her. James stopped a few paces away, hat in his hands. I didn't ask you to decide in a room full of eyes, he said. I asked them to know who I am now. You did more than speak, she answered. You listened. I heard you say you won't be the easier choice, he said. You won't be. You'll be the true one. If you want Boston, I'll sell cattle and go. If you want this valley, we'll stamp both our initials into the brand. If you want no husband at all, I'll still sign that deed without a flinch. Why now? She asked. Because fear kept me safer than love, he said, and safer isn't living. You deserved a man who fights for you in the open. I'm late, Elena. I'm not done. They walked to the hitching rail. A wagon waited. He pulled back the canvas. Inside sat a battered square piano. I know wood and wire can't heal a childhood, he said. You told me your home had music even when it had shouting. I can't promise there will never be storms here. I can promise the music won't stop. Elena laid her fingers on the keys. A note wavered, then steadied. When she looked up, tears tracked clean lines on her cheeks. Say the thing I need, she whispered. I choose you, he said. Not because the town eased, not because Sarah found a kinder road. I chose you when you were burning bread and blistering your hands. I was too scared to say it. You are not convenient. You are the point wind slid down from the peaks. She could keep punishing him. It would be easy. But punishment couldn't build a life. Practice could. Partnership could. Then we practice, she said at last. We sign the deed. We speak when it's hard. We make decisions with two names. And when you retreat into quiet, you come back. I will, he said. They pushed the piano into the cabin together, laughing when it wedged in the doorway. Later, by lamplight, Elena played a simple hymn, halting and soft. James leaned in the threshold, listening like a thirsty man at a well. In the days that followed, the iron hissed M and G, Morrison and Garrett into fresh hide. The deed was filed. James stood beside Sarah and Henry at the christening. He didn't hide any more. On a sunlit afternoon, the pastor came to the ranch. There was no crowd, just wind and two people beneath the porch eaves. Equal partners? The pastor asked. Equal, they answered together. The vows were simple. The future wasn't. But when Elena finished the hymn that night and the last note hung trembling, James took her hand, and neither of them let go.